morning. Australian author Tim Winton has some wonderful stories, and in all of them there's this deep and profound connection between the earth, the world around, the beauty of nature and the characters and the story. They're all interwoven, whether it's the beaches or the wilderness and the bush and the vast spaces of Western Australia, his native home. In the book, The Boy Behind the Curtain, he writes stories of life, of himself, of things he's learned. In one of the stories, The Weight and the Flow, he speaks of discovering surfing. He, as a 5-year-old, was thrust onto a longboard by two of his teenage cousins, both girls, and dragged out into the ocean beyond the breakers. And he describes in vivid detail the sights and the smells, the sounds, his feelings, the board itself, what it looked like, the feel of the paraffin wax beneath his little body, and his fear of the unknown, of the uncertainty. And he's clinging to this board for grim life. And he's taken out, and then suddenly he's turned around and thrust into a wave. And the wave grabs him and holds him and thrusts him shoreward, a great force and energy. And in that moment, all fear is gone, and there's just the exhilaration of the ride, the thrill, the thing he didn't know before. He's captivated, and from that moment, he knows all he wants to do is surf. He's in the flow, and in the story he talks about the cycles and times of surfing and the culture. But always for him, this coming into the water and letting go of the stuff of life, the things that filled his mind, his anxieties and other things, of paddling out, and then the weight. And in the waiting, just being still in the moment. And then the glide onto the wave that comes through, and then the flow of being caught up in this wave, caught up in this thing that you can't control. You can't fight it, you have to go with it. You have to let yourself go and allow the wave to take you. And the ride is exhilarating. And sometimes it's wonderful, and sometimes you crash, and everyone is different. And you're just one with the wave, with the energy, with the life carried on. And in that moment, you're alive, and there's nothing else. I'm not a surfer and haven't had that kind of a thrill in the water. I guess the closest I've had coming to that sort of thing is riding my bike and going down hills, steeper and steeper hills, and going faster and faster, the wind in my hair, and feeling the freedom of gravity pulling you down and getting faster and faster. There's been a couple of crashes when the chain's fallen off in the old days of the old bikes, but the thrill is wonderful. But where I think where I connect with his concept of the weight and the flow are in things like photography, of picking up the camera and going out and entering into the world of nature, trees and plants and flowers and animals and birds, the creek or the beach or the river or the ocean, the sunrise or sunset, the mountains or the valleys or the vista before me. And engaging with it and seeing it through the camera and connecting with it and with the photograph and becoming one with it. The wait for the right photograph, of going in and feeling the flow, the energy of connection and of being. And in that moment, nothing else exists. I'm one with that. I'm in the moment, and there's a life, there's a flow around me of life, of energy, of the world, of being. Or in music. In my early days in music, I had to rigidly depend on the written page before me. And if the notes weren't there, I couldn't play it, or if they were too hard, I couldn't play it. I could only play scales or arpeggios unless the notes were written. But gradually, as I played more and more, and I learned to let go, I discovered that the saxophone became part of me, the reed and the mouthpiece in my mouth, my fingers around it, and my fingers knew the notes, and my ears and my fingers could connect, and I played the notes. They were there. I didn't have to think it. It was there. And as I felt the music, and as the music enveloped me and held me, I could feel it and know where to go. Now sometimes the notes don't sound quite right, or I get it wrong, or it's a bit ordinary. But other times it just feels so natural and right. and I feel caught up in this flow of something bigger than me, this music that holds and grabs me. And in music, whether I'm playing or listening, I'm caught up, and it communicates something beyond words, and it's a moment you're in, a moment of being and of living, of being alive in that moment. And this week we have a couple of stories that really are about, I think, the weight and the flow. The first comes from the ancient stories of the Hebrew people and Ezekiel, who is speaking into the people of his homeland who have been overwhelmed, conquered by the Babylonians and King Nebuchadnezzar, and taken off to Babylon, the leading artisans and craftspeople and citizens, to go and do their stuff in Babylon and serve the empire. But in Babylon, everything's different, and they mourn and they grieve. The landscape, the food, the clothing, the language, the culture, everything is different. And they feel lost, mourning, grieving what they've lost, their home and their God and everything. And Ezekiel is called to speak into this. And he's given this vision. In this vision, he's taken into this valley, a valley filled with dry bones, just desolate bones, lifeless and dead. And the Spirit of God says, "Son of man, prophesy that these bones can live and have sinews and flesh and skin." And in the vision he does. And he hears the rattle of bones, this bone, this bone, this bone, then the dry bones. I hear the word of the Lord, the toe bones connected to the foot bone, etc. The bones rattle and form skeletons, and then sinews and flesh and skin. And in the valley of his vision, there's these lifeless bodies. And the Spirit of God says, "Son of man, prophesy that the winds of life, the breath of life will blow into them and energize and enliven and fill them with life." And he does. And he hears this great wind blow through the valley, the breath of life coming through and blowing and innovating, enlivening these bodies, these lifeless bodies, until they live. And then the Spirit of God says, "Son of man, this valley represents your nation, your people, dead and lifeless. But they can live. My Spirit will breathe life into them and they can live. Go and tell them, prophesy. Go and tell them that I am with them and they will live." And he does. And there's waiting and waiting, but ultimately there is life. And I guess there's signs of life as they embrace life in this new place, but hear God speak to them through this one and bring life. And then 500 or 600 years later, there's another story that Luke tells in his second volume, Acts, a story of the followers of Jesus gathered in this room to worship and to pray and to wait on what Jesus has promised and said. And they don't know what they're waiting for. And this day is a festival, Shavuot in the Jewish festival, the Festival of Weeks, a week of weeks, 50 days after Passover. A festival that had evolving meanings through the history. But here they are gathered on this day, called Pentecost in Greek, after 50. And as they're waiting, they're praying, they're singing. And I guess the waiting is sometimes uncertain and confusion, sometimes scary, they're fearful, they're not sure what next. Some may be excited and anticipating and waiting, but they're waiting. And then all of a sudden, the sound of wind, I guess like that, the wind in that vision of Ezekiel blowing through the valley, blows through the room, and it fills this room with energy and life. And Luke talks about tongues of fire and ecstatic speech and joy and wonder and love and grace and power. And these people are enlivened. And in this moment there's a flow. And the flow takes them and carries them. And the fear is gone. And all they know is the life and the hope and the joy. And it overwhelms them, and they speak into the city, into the people's lives. And the people of all places and cultures and nations are gathered in Jerusalem, hear in their own way, in their own language, perhaps a language beyond words, this life that's promised, this life of Spirit of God. And they're embraced into this way. The Spirit, the flow, the weight, the flow, the life. And as I hear that story and think of Tim Winton's experience, my own experiences in nature or in photographing nature, in music and in other places, to hear the flow of Spirit, the Spirit of life that is around us, that is through us, that is in us, that holds all things together. This Spirit of life that gives life and being to everything flows through us and around us. And when we learn to let go, like in letting go of the music and allowing it to grab me and hold me and carry me, and when I let go and allow this Spirit of life, of being, of God, to envelop me and carry me, to get into that flow, I know life, I know love, I know grace, and I know hope. When I try and hold on and control, when I try and do my thing, when I try and make it work myself, I lose the sense of flow. It's like fighting the wave as a surfer. It's like trying to make the music work on my terms. I've got to let go and allow this flow of life to envelop me and lead me beyond belief systems, beyond structures and rigid forms, into the life that God calls us to. The life of the world, of beauty and wonder, of grace, of love, of connection, of community, of inclusion, all those things that we talk about. This is the flow that the Spirit promises, the flow of life, the flow of love. Will you enter the weight and the flow?